Welcome to Mentor Time, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a topic that probably none of you have heard about because it's something I came up with in the work we've been doing, making sure your professional presence is strong. We're going to talk about what are credibility cues and how do they increase your credibility. The takeaway. When you use credibility cues, you're signaling and reinforcing your expertise. Interestingly enough, when I think back to finishing my doctorate in public health, I couldn't wait to use my title, Dr. Griffey. Not that I needed to use it all the time, but I knew I was going in an organization where there were medical doctors and PhDs. But I had someone say to me, "Well, Sue, you're not in academia. Why would you use it?" This person was questioning, maybe challenging me a little bit. And I said, I have a lot that I've learned. I have a lot that I've paid for what I've learned. And on top of that, I have the right to use it in my signature, but also when I speak or when people decide to address me. So, how are we going to get to what are credibility cues besides Sue's doctorate? And we'll start with what are they? I'll give you a definition. How do they increase my credibility, yours? And as always, what should you do? And most of what you should do are things you're probably already doing, but I hope I'm heightening the awareness for you as well. When we talk about credibility cues, we probably all have been to a dark theater, an arena of some kind where it's dark, and at least in the United States, they have to mark exit signs in case there's an emergency. And they almost always say exit. It looks like this had a green lamp above it. But you sometimes see icons, in this case, a visual that shows the direction and shows maybe you should run. But in actual fact, the picture showed both things. The way I define a credibility cue and why I decided to about it today is the definition for it. It's a signal that helps increase a subliminal message. I'm in a generation that had a problem with advertisers using subliminal messages across TV screens. I'm not talking about hidden messages as subliminal are, but subliminal means you don't stop to read something or you don't listen to something and stop and say, "Oh, Sue, someone called her doctor. I wonder what it is." But in your mind, the visual is Sue, doctor, maybe. I'm curious, based on that introduction, I made a Slido poll, but let's just use the chat box since there aren't that many of us here online. And just put in the chat box an example of a credibility cue when you think about what I just showed that you might use in your professional branding. There's no wrong answers. I'll probably learn a lot from you all about things I didn't think to address, but what would be a credibility cue that you can think of? Ron says dress and deportment. That's very interesting. Yes, there's a visual there that signifies something. The basis in what we do in our professional presence, in our professional branding, is content. Content, content, content. But what is content really? It's actually more complex than stuff that I write or stuff I say. There's a context to it. You've heard me talk about context before. Ron and I talk about that a lot. There's also a visual that you create. For example, this is something I see often. I'm managing a team, Sue. Okay, statement. I've got some content. But what happens if we broaden it for context, for the visual? I lead and manage a team of 7 project coordinators in 3 different locations. If someone could put in the chat box, what visual did you see as I was reading that to you? And in terms of a visual, of a credibility cue, we got another entry mentioning how a skill is used to achieve a goal. Good. All right. So, what visual came into your head when I expanded the content to context and visual for managing a team? Similar to reading. Geography. Yes, I love that. That's exactly what I think of. Something else you might think of complexity. Seven people, three different locations. In my mind, even when I was writing it, I was thinking distributed teams and trying to get them together on a Zoom call for a meeting. All right. Another basis for this is when we share the content, there are two ways we share it. Synchronous. I have something that I've written, for example. You might read it and comment on it immediately, but usually synchronous is I said to Ron when he got on the meeting, "Hi, how are you doing?" And Ron answered me immediately. Asynchronous would be, tends to be more written. I put stuff out on LinkedIn. You may see it or may not, depending on the algorithm. Someone comes back and comments on it right away. Someone doesn't comment on something for a while. This is the asynchronous part of the lives that we all lead now. And as I just mentioned, synchronous is usually verbal, oral, and asynchronous is usually written. We will look at also where and how they occur. You're going to be using them in writing. Here are some examples, and we'll go over some of these. Email address and signature, bio para and resume, big part of it. LinkedIn profile, Zoom box, introductions. Your verbal credibility cues, all sorts of in person events. Some of them are happenstance. I didn't put that in there. Team collaboration, chat box during webinars and seminars, because those can be synchronous. So let's start with the asynchronous because a lot of our time is now spent in a virtual world where we're on platforms and our lives are asynchronous in many ways. And I divided these into primary credibility cues and secondary just because there are things I think that are really important to pay attention to and make sure you've done them, and the secondary ones that are the nice to have. First one is email. I still get email addresses that are not professional emails. Now, I know when people write me, and there's someone who attends this regularly who uses his old email address, which is a very informal email. But I've seen his CV, so I know that his email is formal. Name plus Gmail, for example. In this case, this is my Sue Mentor's mailbox. Your signature. Name, the name you want to be known by, the name you are known by, and your degrees. Again, you worked hard for those. And if you're interested, add your platforms that you're on, add some past history that you're on. I put in all the mentoring places the programs I work on. All right. Biopara, and I separate this out from your CV, from your resume, because the biopara can be used and is used on its own when you may use it to email someone and say, here's so and, or if you send me something and I send it on to someone else, I'll use your biopara. So here's a before. NG's a program management professional. Great. We've got an idea. But look what happens when we've got her name and her degree. And she gave me approval to use these for mentor time and training purposes. So now we see that her name is there the way she likes to be referred to. She uses Jillian. And we see her degrees. And she also has her title. So in the left half of the screen, because you know that's how we scan, we get a lot of credibility. I don't read Jillian Jika MA. I just look and scan, and MA's in my brain. She has an advanced degree. She has an undergraduate degree. She has CHES, for example, the community health educator certification. And I also highlighted the left side of the rest of her bio para because we can see training and mentoring 6 trainers, diverse stakeholders from government frequently presented. So clues that give you credibility of what you've done using your evidence. On the resume CV, here's your first page. Right up top, we want your degrees after your name. I've gotten a couple CVs recently from course applicants, and they're still following apparently old career services advice from school or someone where they put their name in large text, but they don't put their degrees up there. You're missing the opportunity to signal, here's who I am. Your LinkedIn URL also says, and by the way, I'm on this platform. It's getting more common that people do this, but occasionally I'm working with someone now who barely has a LinkedIn profile and someone else who has not even got one yet. And that's fine. You can start no matter how late it is. We just talked about the bio para, repeating that, and some people will say, well, Sue, it's at the top of my resume. Maybe you've heard the conventional wisdom that people need to hear things 7 times before they remember them. So you're repeating again the credibility along with your title. That's a signal. Ron and I talk about these things all the time, leading with your job titles and your duration, and the job title being on the left margin for scannability, but also to get focused on not where you worked, but what you did, what your title was, what area are you credible in. In Jillian's case, you can see in her job, we have 3 task areas, as I often recommend, starting on the left margin. We can skim it easily and pick up the content that she works in. And then she has bullets that are slightly indented, but they're not too far over. We don't have to move our head to scan. And we can pick that up that, oh, under program management, looks like that's what she did a lot of her work in because she's got more bullets, for example. All of these things are subliminal. I'm not looking at that, and most of you, I suspect, would be the same. You're not looking at it saying, oh, it's 4 bullets. Your mind's capturing it, and then later you say, oh, yeah, that was the biggest section. And she ends with what I recommended and started with you all several months ago, which was follow LinkedIn's pattern of putting your top skills that you use, 3 to 5 of them, after the job itself. So now in the first page, we've got all of these things combined. And I'm just showing you that so you can remind yourself when you're working on this. What I call the secondary credibility cues won't be as obvious either in your resume, CV, or LinkedIn profile, but your intellectual property signals, look at this, categories. This person, Rena, has several ways that she's demonstrated what she's published, what she's provided in speaking. And she's also then shown us her roles, which is why I ask you to make citations. So you have the credibility of looking like it's an official something, an official presentation, an official report. But you'll notice, for example, halfway down the page in the middle of that first bullet, there were no authors on those Viva development strategies documents, but she followed the citation guidelines I've developed and says she was a key writer as part of the core team. Again, credibility, we know what she's done if they happen to scroll down that far. And also education, professional orgs, if you're a member of APHA, for example, honors, she called them affiliations, membership. But no matter what, you show these things that provide more indications for people of what you've done and builds your credibility cues picture. Quickly, I want to go through LinkedIn. Your first box is where most of the cues are. Banner photo, headshot, yep, most of you have them now. LinkedIn, finally, a year and a half ago, allowed you to put things besides your last name in the last name box. So put your degrees there. another signal because your headline, your name and your headline follow you around. That will be there wherever you comment in LinkedIn or when you put a post up. I just mentioned the headline. My headline, that's 58 characters, including spaces. 58 to 85 is what we all think LinkedIn will carry around on, depending whether you're on mobile or on your PC. But that is the important part that follows you around. Make sure your headline is telling people something because it's another credibility cue. This says, I tell you what my solution is for working with you, for example. The secondary ones I put in pink in LinkedIn. They're not as important, but it's helpful if you put in your employment and if the employer has a LinkedIn company page, so you're not getting the gray box. And if you've chosen to display your education, which is the second part of that, it just signals, oh, Sue went here, Sue did that. Again, no value judgments, positive or negative, but what it says is you're building up a picture that at a glance people can see. Oh, look at that. Her profile's pretty full. Oh, she went to Tulane. I didn't know that. Name record, many of you are doing that. Again, that signals, especially we're still not seeing that many people with name record. So take advantage of it. You'll stand out. And I put these in light green, but it's helpful that you have your location or at least a metropolitan area location. And we can see the size of a network. We want people to have 500 or more connections so you can really benefit from LinkedIn's virtual help. So those are more secondary, but they're easy to do, but they're signals that people will get about who you are and form an impression. Remember Ron's comment on when I asked what visual cue, what credibility cue would you use? For example, Ron said dress and deportment. Here's a LinkedIn profile that's dressed, that has the things it needs to have. The only other section that I think also serves this way, because most people don't scroll down past this, maybe they scroll down to your job, but most people scan, is your about section. And this is the way it looks without expanding it. The credibility of putting in the left-hand margin who you are, what you do, and then the top 5 skills that they allow you to put in there. Again, signals that you're giving to people as they scroll, as they're thinking about connecting with you. In the synchronous world now, I went through and realized there's so many ways that we introduce ourselves over and over and over again. And not all of them are in person. But for example, this person is presenting. He had to present himself. This could have been a class, it could be a seminar for community education. He presented himself, so he gave an introduction about himself. And the phrasing of it may change each time. For example, when I introduce myself, I don't talk about a doctorate or Dr. Griffey. I focus on what I do with Sue Mentors and the mentoring consultancy that I have, because that's mostly what people want to hear from me and what's important for most people. There's also when someone else introduces you, when you're introduced by others, then you've had to provide them with what you want them to say, and it's their choice to say everything or change what you've said, as long as it's factually correct. But there's an opportunity, don't forget, if someone else is going to introduce you. And the third way, we forget that we get the chance to make an introduction. If we're attending a seminar or a conference in person, they ask for questions. In this case, the person didn't even have to stand up in the aisle to get a microphone. But you can say, I'm Sue Griffey from Sue Mentors, and I thought it was interesting that you said X, and I want to know about Y. This is one we've talked about in many ways in the past. The video meeting chat box. Your introduction can go here. The way that you provide expertise can go in here in real time. This is why it's in the synchronous section. But even though it's things you write in the chat box, it is the synchronous way that people are reading it while you're still online exchanging information. I think we forget about the credibility cues in collaboration. And they come, for example, in this picture, from either that person presenting something for feedback or that person presenting something that everybody else needs to learn. It's not clear which way it is, and it doesn't matter. But when you use your expertise in a way that's helpful to people, you're providing them the credibility cues, or someone will leave a meeting and say, I had no idea that Ron knew all about Six Sigma, and we could have been using him and his help, for example, for the last few years. No surprise, this will be very big in interviews. If you're the interviewer, you need to, even if you've had an exchange by email with the person and said, I'm the HR person or the hiring manager, you still need to say, hello, welcome, I'm so and so, and I'm whatever title they are. Something that lays out why they're credibly there to interview you before they say, and tell me about yourself. And if you're the interviewee, you've already practiced this. And your credibility cues come from using your evidence that demonstrates. Think about these as ways to show your expertise rather than tell your expertise. So when Ron and I talk about evidence-based results, it's because we don't want you saying, I'm an excellent communicator. You say, I've frequently written annual reports for both US government and international NGOs. That tells people, oh, you know how to write reports, and you know the audiences for them. And of course, synchronous is in networking, can be online, oftentimes in person. But remember, whether it's in person or online, you can make a QR code on LinkedIn that gets people to scan and go directly to connect with you on LinkedIn. But look at what happens when you make that QR code on your phone. It's the only way you can do it on LinkedIn. Very easy to do. It brings in my name with my degrees, and it brings in the beginning of my headline so that people who are connecting with you, and if you want to know how to put it on your phone wallpaper, let me know. But when you use it, when you're face to face connecting, or if you're using it to say you're presenting a webinar and you put it at the end, when they scan that, they're also seeing your name, your degrees, and your headline again. All right, I forgot to stop and ask you for examples when I was going through that. I'll ask you now because I want to, what you should do is going to be things you're already doing. You need to check and maximize these, but now that you're aware of credibility cues, asynchronous, your documents, your online platforms that you participate in, and synchronous, if someone's going to introduce you especially, or if you have to send in bio information, prep it and share it ahead with the credibility cues in there. And using multiple options. For example, at an in-person networking meeting, you might have a name tag. You don't have to just live with what they put there. It could say, mine used to say Susan Griffey. And then at the bottom, I'd write Sue in big letters because I prefer to be called that now. I just register as that. You may still have business cards. Some people do, and they're still very efficient, or the QR code we just talked about. So before I close, if you'll put in the chat, what is one thing that you feel like you learned today that you could make more of, or think, or it was a revelation that you feel, oh, I never thought about this as being something that helps establish or expand my credibility? QR code for LinkedIn. Yeah, it's very helpful. It's great for a lot of things, for sure. Great. Thank you. I'll tell you, as I've been working in this over and over again, for me, I'm struck by how often you all don't claim your credit by using your degrees and your titles in appropriate places. You all are doing it, but now I hope I've shown you more ways to do it without sounding like you're full of puffery. I don't know why I love that term puffery, because I guess because it sounds puffed up. But let me just, before I ask Ron, here's what we started with. Using these credibility cues will signal and reinforce your expertise. And I'm just going to remind you, you want to show, not tell. Show and show again so people remember you. Ron, love your feedback on this because we've talked about this informally a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I put in dress and deportment earlier, in so many ways, this was to me about, well, it's presentation. There's a professionalism in your presentation and so on. And I was thinking more physical. And it's interesting in one of the things I picked up from some of your examples you showed is the variation in what I would call dress code and how it depends on where you are. See, when 30 years ago, I left the military, and for me, jacket and tie was pretty normal and a fairly formal dress, et cetera. And that was my norm. And in the last 30 years, I've become pretty casual. And so I've become much more and more casual. Yet there are times, once again, where a jacket and tie might be the appropriate thing, or certainly dressed up and the like. And so that's a pretty important thing. And it reminded recently, my wife was attending, it's a small group that we have, and she says, I'm just coming in my pajamas. She says, it's decent that I'm covered up and it looks like a dress or something.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of interesting thing. And we hear horror stories of, you talk about Zoom presence and the like, and you hear the horror stories about somebody in the days of COVID showing up. They have a jacket or a shirt on, but they're in their underwear or something, and they stand up and anyway, there are those elements about credibility, I think, that are really important.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned the idea of using your doctorate as part of your presentation. My medical exercise therapist has a PhD in his specialty out of Germany, and he definitely wants to use it because he's in a medical field, and so calling himself doctor gives a type of credibility that is really important, I think, in what he's doing. And so he does do that. And that's the reason, because I've talked to him about that. And it's really all about the credibility that label brings with it. And he needs that credibility in the kind of work he does. What was it? The last thing I was going to say is that some people confuse a slick presentation, say in the CV or the resume, a slick presentation, and for them, it's these fancy templates because they got banners and they've got colors and they've got all this other stuff. And for a lot of folks, they think that gives me more credibility because it's slick or something. And it's hard to sometimes help people break away from that thinking, because what's slick is how you illustrate it. In other words, that's slick. It shows and it illustrates and gives the right kind of cues in the right kind of way. It's easy to read and so on and so forth. Whereas the fancy, dancy stuff, unless you're a graphic designer, and if you're a graphic designer, I would expect you to do something a little different. And once I worked with an architect, and she did a resume, which was fascinating. It illustrated her thinking, and it was really well done. So unless you're in that kind of field,
Yeah.
want to stick to some pretty basic stuff. The guidelines I think that you and I provide are the kinds of things that people should do, and that gives you the credibility because the content is easily accessible and the like. So anyways, just some thoughts.
Great. Yeah. And by the way, as we know, those templates don't pass the ATS. The electronic scanning gets all screwed up. The point of today was to show you that you're already doing things right in so many ways, but I want you to be aware of them so that you are intentional about using them. I'm going to ask Ron to close the meeting.
Thank you. Oh, Sheila's got her hand up. So
Oh,
Sheila, go
Sheila,
ahead.
yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for that advice. So I think when you asked the question, my mind wandered too far, but I love these subtle looking tips that makes someone stand out in terms of credibility. And I was also thinking another thing that I see, especially on people that have big brands, is the website link under their name on LinkedIn. Visit my website. Yeah, and I try to do that with my portfolio, but it only works with the paid version. In the
Oh,
about section, I was able to put a link to my portfolio there, like in pictures.
yeah.
So I'm thinking that could be another thing. And then I also have a question. I see sometimes YouTube will recommend me to contribute to a topic. For example, they will say contribute your thoughts on burnout in the workplace. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that contributes to someone's credibility or
Mhm.
if it helps with the LinkedIn presence.
Yeah, no, Sheila, I love it. You are really one of our best students of your taking control of your professional development. Thank you for the idea about putting your portfolio link in your headline in not in LinkedIn, in your heading information, your contact information on your resume, putting it in your about section. That's great. That I love that idea. I just lost track of what you were saying. Uh, oh, collaborative articles. You see that gold thing there under the top career development coaching voice? That's
Yes,
what
yes.
Sheila, that's what you're talking about. I'm just explaining for others. LinkedIn for the last year and a half has had what they call collaborative articles. So they've used AI to research a topic. And in the topics I work in are career development, mentoring, and it's under the big HR area. They put an article out and they say, here, would you like to contribute to this? And you mentioned burnout, for example. So you go in and you answer, they usually have 6 parts. Here's the intro, here's something, and here, anything else you want to add. And you answer under there. And every time we did those, if you did at least if you did one commenting on 3 different articles, meaning you did at least 3 contributions every 60 days, you got this awarded to you, which is different from there's a very rare LinkedIn top voice called LinkedIn Top Voice is Blue. But this was something anybody could attain. And there's been discussions among my LinkedIn expert friends about good or bad. I thought I liked it. It was helpful to see what other people recommended, and I would usually put my own spin on things that I thought were different. And I had just started updating the collaborative articles a week ago because I made a note like, oh, it's going to lapse in 60 days. I was coming close to the 60 days. I think it's next week. LinkedIn announced last week that they're getting rid of this feature, partly because they've been under a lot of pressure, people gaming the system, going in and writing, not garbage, but just writing pablum, writing simple things that everybody knows and getting, because LinkedIn just awarded it by an algorithm that said Sue did 2 times, 3 times, so she gets it. I think that it has its use, and what I've said over and over again in groups that I'm in, they could take each of those articles with our expert contributions and turn them into something valuable. That's how you get state of the art, by having people that are doing it right now say, here's what I found works. But I guess they're not that interested. I don't know. I think they were trying to gauge what they could do with AI stuff because this started just after ChatGPT and the other LLMs started coming online. Sheila, there as of I think it's November 1st, this is going away, or maybe next week. If you want to do 3 articles, go ahead. I do 4 just to make sure. And then you'll get a top voice, and then you can take the screenshot. And for the next 3 months, for the next 2 months after that, it'll be on there until whatever end of December or whenever they're taking the whole thing down. So I think that would be great if you want to do that. And then we went back and forth in the LinkedIn experts. Do we put it on our resume or on anywhere? No, we don't. I don't say that. I just wait for people to recognize it. But it was common enough that people recognized, oh, you have a yellow badge. Most of the people that I work with, Sheila, like you, Peter, others, wouldn't necessarily be looking for that because you know me in other ways, so you wouldn't look for that as any credibility. And LinkedIn never defined it. It's not like they have a list of people who are listed as top voice. Ron, do you have any thoughts on that? I know we've talked about it before. I don't know if you saw that latest message.
Yeah, no, I hadn't. That wasn't something I was aware of, but now that it's going, I can see why. It's funny, AI should be able to figure this out, whether it's substantive content or whether it's rubbish.
Yeah.
That's my view on the subject. So if they are planning on using an AI tool to do it, clearly they're using an outdated model, and they may decide that they can go back and redo it. But it also then becomes a little bit intrusive, maybe at some point. So anyway, it's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
The fact that it's going away doesn't really surprise me, only because, like they said, people will write Pabble.
I don't think a lot of people read the articles. I think I would, when someone commented that I knew, I would go support it. But other than that, no one's going there looking for how do I write my resume if I'm an over 50 job seeker. There's easier ways to do that.
Right.
So thank you, Sheila. I'm glad that's helpful. If I were you, I would game the system and do it if you want. If you have time in the next couple of days, do it and get that badge and then use it. We'd love to see it. And if you do get it, let me know and I'll try. I'm going to make a note to keep a watch for it myself so that I can make sure just to congratulate you for the next few weeks as long as you can participate. But as I say, they said it'll stay up for 2 months after the last badge holder. All right, Ron, if you'll close the meeting.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for joining. And there'll be some who will be seeing the recording of this. So thanks very much. And we will be getting together in 2 weeks' time. So look forward to seeing you then.